Welcome, everyone, and welcome to Behind the Mic. Today on Behind the Mic, we have voice actor Rob McCollum, who is another Funimation guy, one of the big group from Texas who, well, they do a lot of the anime that we know and love. So welcome to the show, Rob.
Thank you. Yes, I'm actually literally behind a mic, actually at this moment behind a mic in Dallas, Texas. So, yeah, it's good to be on.
How's the weather been?
It is really, really muggy, but it is not nearly as hot as it normally is. People don't understand that Texas, Dallas, and further south is like 105 degrees all summer long. So the fact that it is not there yet is rather pleasant.
Did you get affected too much by that baseball hailstorm?
We missed it, and usually Dallas gets hit pretty hard by the hail, but right in our area, I'm in Dallas proper, in East Dallas, and we missed it, but it was coming. I was actually kind of looking forward to it because I wanted it to destroy my car.
So you can get a new one?
Because I wanted to get a new one, but I can't afford a new one yet. Because despite what everyone thinks, animation, not the most lucrative field for buying new fancy cars.
Which is definitely something that, though we can't talk to necessarily you about it, is definitely something that's coming up really soon with men in your field. With the potential strike coming up, really, hopefully never has to happen.
I don't know that that's going to happen in Texas, because Texas is a right-to-work kind of non-union state, so it's going to be interesting to see where that all shakes out, and also, like, you know, we want to stand with our brothers, so we're not going to want to be taking work away from them that they're, you know, on principle not doing. So it's going to be interesting to see how all that shakes out. Hopefully
it never comes to that.
It won't come to that. I mean, I think that's part of the reason why Funimation came to Texas in the first place. Was way back in the day in the 90s, they were like, there's no model for what we charge for dub work because it's kind of a new field. Let's go somewhere where we can be non-union and not have to pay anybody anything. Luckily, they've started paying people a little more now. But in the beginning, in the early days, it was just the Wild West of we can do whatever we want. Here's $5. You're an actor.
Well, in the early days, I remember early stories of Dragon Ball Z, I believe, where they're just like voice actors would quit and leave, and they're like, hey, you sound person, you're recording, come over here.
Oh, yeah.
You janitor, you're doing this voice. And that's why they had to like fix it in Kai and some of the later ones, because they had random people doing voices early on.
Sure, like, and there wasn't, before there was a huge following for it, people would be like, oh, it doesn't matter, we'll just replace that person in this because no one's going to really know and track it. Because that was, you know, not pre-internet, but that was before the internet was nearly as pervasive as it is now. So the idea that there would be a behind the voice actors or an anime news network that was tracking every episode and who was in it was unfathomable to them. So yeah, it was a lot of like, hey, you'd be there recording something, you know, for a show, and be walking down the hall, and just a director would pop their head out and go, hey, what are you doing? Do you have 5 minutes? All right, come here. You're in this show. Like, no audition. No, it was all based on availability. You happened to be standing there right then. It's a little more structured now.
Well, and the quality has definitely gone up now as they've focused more on making sure the acting of it. Because, like, I love Dragon Ball Z from the beginning, but there's a reason why I own Kai and I don't own the original DVDs that came out, because the voice acting, once they let Sabat and the other ones just like, you know, make it so it's the same all the way through, it got a lot better.
Yeah, there was consistency. And also, like, the same person is not voicing 5 different characters, which happened a lot in those early days too.
Unless it's Christopher Sabat, then he does like
he can do anything. But
he does everything.
He's a magician, so that's totally merited.
And yeah, so you know, we of course started talking about voice acting in Texas. So the one question that I like to ask a lot of people is why voice acting? Because, you know, Texas is a big hub for voice acting, mainly for anime and some video game stuff. But why did you get into voice acting? Since I know you do a lot of other stuff. You do television, you do Good Morning Texas and stuff. Why anime voice acting?
Well, Dallas is a big hub for voice work in terms of commercial voiceover. Because there's so many big ad agencies here that they'll shoot their commercials, if it's TV, you know, anywhere, you know, they'll shoot it in Toronto or LA or wherever, but they'll do the post-production here in Dallas because there's so many ad agencies and they want to do it close to home, and there's also some really big post-production houses here in town. So there was a large commercial world to be making money in as an actor when you start trying to do on camera. And so way, way back, when I first decided to start trying to do this, and then eventually left the real world and the real job to do this full time, commercial voiceover was the goal, because that was the way to pay the bills and a lot more work than there was in just on camera stuff. And so back then people were like, okay, yeah, you just need to practice. You just need to get on a microphone and work with it and learn this instrument. And that was kind of before home studios were affordable and home editing equipment wasn't really a thing you could have. Again, this is back in the 90s, before many of the listeners to this podcast were born. But so people said, yeah, you should just try to get on anywhere you can, get any experience in a microphone that you can. And so when my friend Mike McFarland, who was I'd known for doing improv comedy in Dallas for years, in various groups, and he was in different groups, but we were friends and ran in the same circles. He started directing as well as, acting in hundreds of titles. But he said, hey, I'm doing this. Would you ever want to come do it? So I jumped at it knowing very little about anime at the time, as just an opportunity to get on a microphone and start practicing and start learning what I sounded like and what I could do.
So since you do a lot of anime when it comes to your voice work, and anime in America still is a genre that has a lot of people have weird stigmas toward it, and they think it is stuff that it's not, or they think that it's for kids when it's not, or there's a bunch of weird ideas when it comes to anime. Have you had any interesting experiences where you had to defend the fact that you do anime and it is not either this straight on kids program or this weird nerd niche that you're working with, and that it is legitimate work?
There was a time a while back. I feel like in a lot of ways, anime has crossed the threshold of that stigma that it used to have. Partially because of awareness, and also just because of nerd culture in general has become mainstream culture. Like it used to be those of us that, in our little niches, then we loved Star Wars and Star Trek, and we were the niche groups, and anime was one of those niche groups. But now that form of entertainment has become mainstream, and the comic book fans are now, running studios. And so I think under that umbrella, anime has made the move to where people used to be like, oh, why do you do that? And now they're like, oh, you get to do that? That's really cool. Because where it used to seem weird and fringe, now it seems hip and cutting edge, because it's part of that popular culture nerdcore movement, I call it. The nerdcore is cool now. All the nerdy stuff we did and all the action figures that we kept now suddenly are super hip and cool. So it's kind of nice. It's a good time to be a nerd, I guess.
A very good time.
But yeah, there were a lot of times that I had to explain kind of what it was. Not so much that there was a negative impression as opposed to just no impression. There was just a whole bunch of people that were not aware that this happens. But now the prevalence of anime conventions, I mean, there's 5 anime conventions any given weekend somewhere across the country. And where it used to be, the news crews would come out and be like, what is this strange thing happening in our city? There are people in costumes and girls in cat ears. Now it doesn't even rate news because it's so understood and so common. They've seen it so many times before. The people get it, like, oh, there's anime's a thing, and people watch it, and they like to dress up and cosplay. Okay, so it's not the magical unicorn that it used to be. It's become much more mundane, and that's a good thing. That's also due to the fact that there's so many channels and so much online access to the material now.
Yeah, since the rise of like Crunchyroll, Hulu, even Netflix,
Sure.
A lot of anime just exists here because of Netflix, and it's made it a lot easier to digest anime, where before, I remember as a kid, Toonami was where I watched most of it, and it was extremely stressful because if I missed a day, I'd miss an episode of Dragon Ball Z where something might actually happen. Usually no, but something might actually happen. 1
of the 26 where some storyline actually occurred.
Yeah, something might happen, or they might be screaming for half an hour, but I had to watch it every day, and then it'd be like 6 months to several years of nothing, and then like 10 more episodes would come out, and then you'd have to watch them, and it's a lot less stressful now to consume your anime and realize there's a lot more than what Toonami could give you, or Adult Swim, or some of these other places could actually show you.
Well, and the nice thing is now with things like the Funimation channel, I'm not just shilling for the company I do a lot of work for, but okay, I'm shilling for the company that I do a lot of work for. The Funimation channel, there's ways to legally get your stuff for not very expensive. So you don't have to just rip it or BitTorrent it or, that was the big problem that anime had for a long time, was that their primary target, their primary user base was also the most tech savvy people on the planet. So if anybody was going to know how to rip it and stream it and not pay for it, these fans were able to do that. And so it took a while for the message to get out, like, hey, if you're a fan and you want to see more of this happen, you probably ought to pay something for it or it's not going to keep going. And maybe and I feel like they did a good job of meeting the fans halfway and saying, okay, we understand you want to stream it. We understand you don't want to buy DVDs of everything because that gets expensive. Here's a middle ground and a model where you can still pay for it and still contribute, but it's not going to break your bank. So it's, again, all that's evolving. The whole relationship between the economics and the fans and is ever evolving, and it's going to be interesting. Again, part of the same conversation we had, like how do the voice actors take part in that, and if something goes huge and gets really famous.
Yeah, I think I remember the earliest one I remember for trying online, because at the time you had to buy the VHSs, and if like a fan of Dragon Ball Z, if you're buying the VHSs, you're gonna have like 400 of them.
Oh my gosh!
And they weren't cheap. I think it was the Tsunami Reactor was the first one I remember from Cartoon Network that had like we could stream like
mind-boggling.
Yeah, I had a friend who actually owned every episode of Dragon Ball Z on VHS. I'm like, I can't. No, that shelf is huge. And then add like Naruto now or Bleach or some of those ones where there's like hundreds of episodes. The VHS days are just too big. Yeah.
You need to rent a separate house just to store your One Piece.
Yeah, but now, as you said, because of online stuff, I think started with the Tsunami Reactor, which didn't last that long because of pirating. But that's where I saw like Harlock Saga, Patlabor, and like Lotus War, some of those Star Blazers and stuff like that. Now people can actually consume all your work, and so I'm assuming, since you've talked about conventions, you've been to these anime conventions, and I'm just wondering, since you've done, as most anime actors, hundreds of roles, do you ever are surprised what people latch on to and approach you for in conventions, and you go, what, you really remember me in that role versus this one over here? Are you ever surprised in conventions what people latch on from your work?
Oh, absolutely. Well, and also I haven't had the time to do a whole lot of conventions, just because I've had dad stuff and also work as a producer here in town, and around, so I don't have a lot of free weekends. So I'm not able to go very often. When I do go, I'm amazed because it's rare. The people will travel for a really long way to get an autograph from me, and it kind of blew my mind, especially in the early days when I first started going to a few. I'm like, I didn't know this mattered to you, and especially this small performance in this one show mattered to people as much as it did. But what it is that they've got 8 other people from the primary cast that have already signed their DVD case, and I'm the last one because I don't go that often. They're like, we drove 4 hours from Chicago just to get you to sign this thing. We've been waiting for 5 years. And also just it's nice because you get very caught up in the marketing and PR of whatever you're currently in and doing. So, like, for the last year, it's all been Attack on Titan talk everywhere all the time. It's all, of course, because it's a huge show and everybody loves it, and it's a great show. But then someone comes back with a throwback with, like, hey, man, Yu Yu Hakusho. And I'm like, yes, nice. The ones that you loved that you thought nobody else cared about, and then they'll come up and ask you to sign it. It's pretty cool.
And speaking of Attack on Titan, you guys at Funimation helped save us from having to watch. Honestly, I don't like watching anime subtitled, and Netflix has it only subtitled, and I can't. I'd like to understand what I'm watching. So I'm one who's all for dubbed, and you guys made it so Attack on Titan was available dubbed, and that saved us from a lot of stress.
Well,
because I wanted to see what the big deal was.
Sure. Oh, absolutely. Well, and people have the dub versus sub conversation all the time. Actually, you had one of the people that sent in a question for Tatum when he was on your show a while back, saying, what's your feeling on sub versus dub? I love both because I want to hear the Japanese actors and the original director's intent and their emotion and the way it works. It's a very different thing, but I would much rather watch this dub first, see the American interpretation, but also to get the storyline, or rather than be distracted trying to read the subtitles to figure out the storyline and the information that I need, distracting me from the performance. So I will use the dub as my, I guess, cheat. Like you read Game of Thrones book 1 before you watch season 1, so you know all the information, and then you can just relax in and enjoy it. So I'll do both, because I do think, the purity of that pure experience of hearing the initial voices, there is something to be said for that. But I'm the same way. If you're reading it, you're not in it. You're one step removed. So I'm glad that we provide both. But I tell everybody, like, hey man, if you liked my performance and you're into this story, go back and take a pass through and listen to it in the Japanese and see what they did, because sometimes it's different and it's always interesting.
So with Funimation, I remember early anime with Funimation, I was always surprised whenever I watched it not on Cartoon Network or not on TV, because back then they edited a lot of anime, added whole clothing outfits, or changed genders of characters, or names of characters, or lots of stuff that, like, when you watch it on DVD, you're like, I do not remember this character being named this, or that character had a lot more clothes on when I was a child. Have you noticed a change in recent years of that they're just letting the translation go as it is versus relying more on heavily editing things to make sure it's on television and kids can watch it?
Well, it just depends on the property. I mean, the yes, to a certain extent, meaning that there's a lot more ways for people to access it. So there is a market for something that would never play on broadcast television. It's still a chance that there's going to find an audience and that people are going to be able to see it. But in terms of dollars, I mean, I think any of the companies that are distributing now would love to be on Cartoon Network and are willing to jump through any number of hoops to get their material on there. It's just that now the ones that don't get picked up by one of those broadcast outlets are still getting made, are still getting dubbed, and are still getting released, and those can be anywhere in the spectrum in terms of age appropriateness and content. It just used to be the only things we could ever find, like you said, were the things that finally made it to broadcast. And so we saw the stuff that was sanitized for your protection. Now, I'm not a huge fan of sanitizing. I think people are a little overcautious about what they think is going to be damaging to people to see, especially young people. I mean, I've got kids. And a lot of times I feel like doing things to avoid an awkward conversation is probably not beneficial as beneficial as having the awkward conversation and getting it over with. I think people are pretend to be afraid of damaging young minds when in truth they're afraid of them having to have an oogie conversation with their 9-year-old daughter or son. And I'm like, you know what? That's on you, dude. I know you don't want to admit that these things happen in the world so that you can pretend like it doesn't happen, but maybe you should actually talk to your kids about it. So, that's a little different in the violence standpoint, but yeah. Sorry, that was another soapbox.
Yeah. That's
a soapbox button.
I like it. Because I just remember, sometimes it's like Dragon Ball Z. They pretty much just took out some blood, changed Mr. Satan's name to Hercule for some reason. But it's mainly some blood, maybe mild swearing. And now Dragon Ball Z, they don't really edit anything because it's been in theaters, and the fans that grew up with it are older, so they don't care as much for some of it. But like I remember there was a show that I watched, I think Outlaw Star, where you watch, it's like 25 episodes or whatever, and you watch it all on Cartoon Network, and they don't really edit that much, but then you realize they cut an entire episode out because for some reason there's a random episode in the middle where everyone's naked the entire time, and it makes no sense for the whole show, but everyone's naked for this entire episode. But the rest of the show is pretty PG, but then this one episode is not.
Yeah, well, we call that Funny Friday. That's what Funimation is like on every Friday. It's just naked day. Which, is not nearly as attractive as it would sound. I know that everyone thinks that anime people are going to be svelte and very cut. I'm sure that's the stereotype, but it's not so much the case.
Only Crispin Freeman. Only him.
Well, J. Michael Tatum's also fairly large and strong, a strong man.
um, so I have a couple listener questions, and I have an audio one, which I'll play in just a second. So the first one is, this is one that gets asked a lot. I just want to know, since you work on anime, and when you do anime, you have to do voice to match, and you get to see the picture as you do it. Have you ever, especially in your early days, been surprised by what you're seeing on the screen? Like, there's been some areas there's butterflies that are actually flying panties, or just some of the stuff that they put out there. They're a lot less PC than we are in America, where we're more careful with animation as well. Are you ever surprised by what you're actually adding voice to on the screen for some of these shows?
The very good question, and the answer is absolutely. Especially the when for a long time Funimation steered clear of the more adult titles, and then over the years they just kind of ran out of G things to do and started doing PG, and then moved on to TVMA stuff. And so in the early days there was none of that, and then all of a sudden things were coming past the screen on you, and you're like, wait, what did I just see? I remember Witchblade was a really good property that I still am really proud of. I think that was a really good show. But there was a scene in that when the very large busted woman hero, when she turned into her persona, her Witchblade persona, has a huge sword and is cutting off the long turrets of a tank. If you can imagine the imagery of long turreted tanks with that being sliced off, and then the missiles coming out of the tanks didn't move in straight lines, but kind of wiggly lines, and so the tails of smoke coming behind them also had like little tails. So yeah, it was sperm. I'm saying it was sperm. I'm saying it was metaphor. It wasn't subtle, and that was one of the first ones. I'm like, wait, hold on, back up, because you see the pre-roll like before your line or before your character speaks. You see the things that are happening before, and I'm like, hold on, whoa. Did I just see what I think I saw? Was that okay? Yes. All right. Metaphor received. I now understand what we're talking about.
So another listener one, with Tatum, we learned about his how he got into the Dragon Ball Z team officially, with his story about screaming and passing out and being able to handle the Dragon Ball Z scream. And they want to know, since you've worked on Dragon Ball Z and Dragon Ball GT and some of the games, are you an official initiate into the Dragon Ball Z family of screaming?
I have never had to pass out. I've never been pushed as far as he, and I've heard him tell that story on several occasions. Because I was not one of the initial, I did not have to pass out in Dragon Ball. I have played several characters along the way in the world. That Goten, the Teen Goten, was a fun one, but he was kind of a dork, so he didn't, he just launched things accidentally and didn't ever get to really do a whole lot of power up. So yeah, I've yet a couple of the monsters. I've played a few monsters across that were really, really gravelly and rough. But in terms of the 5-second yell and the 6-second scream, I have not had to do those yet, nor have I fainted in the booth with Mike McFarlane. Although I still feel like
you should.
I still feel like he's gunning for me. He's waiting for the right opportunity to make that happen.
Okay, so this one comes from listener Matt, and let's hope it plays through like it did last week.
In Psychopaths, you played Kogami, and he's a awesome and deep and complex character, but it seems like for at least the first few episodes, he doesn't actually talk that much, and it got me wondering if there was any specific differences or challenges for a voice actor playing a character that doesn't have as many spoken lines.
Great question. Yeah, I love that character. Psychopaths is one of my favorite properties that I've done in the last several years. A really interesting show and a lot of legitimate questions to be brought up. You don't always look to anime for your questions of societal justice and injustice, and I love it when those kind of issues are dealt with in an anime. But yeah, Kogami was a great character. Yeah, he's super quiet. That was the only other thing, is that you think, oh great, I got a lead, so you're excited about that, and it's an awesome lead, like it's a great character, and so you're so excited, and then they go, yeah, we're only going to need you for about an hour for the first 3 episodes because you don't say much. You're like, oh, okay, no, that's fine. So it's not quite as lucrative as you hoped it was going to be. But yeah, you also have a less amount of time to communicate who this guy is. And, and the animation did a lot of that work because it was just so visually interesting in Psychopaths. But yeah, you've got to say, okay, I've got 2 lines in this episode. He's listening and he's brooding and he, is snarkily responding to a couple of things that other people say. But the audience still needs to get a feel for him and be interested, at least curious into like, who is this guy? So yeah, it's a challenge. You have to think more about it. When you have page after page after page of dialogue, you can kind of find the character as you go, and maybe you go back and re-record some stuff that you did at the beginning once you find the flow by page 3. But when you've only got 4 or 5 lines, you have to make them matter. So you have to kind of think about it and prepare ahead of time. Good question. Glad that Kogami's getting some love.
So here's another listener one. They just want to know, what is an example of an easy voice for you to pull off that you get to do, and what is an example of a voice that tends to be difficult for you to do that you also get to do in your projects?
Well, it's changed over time, actually, because the easiest, of course, are the ones that are closer to your natural register, and my natural register has gotten lower and gravelier as the years go by, as will happen when you do anything for. I think like 15 years now we're going on, maybe 16 years since some of that early Case Closed and Dragon
Yu Yu Hakusho, Dragon Ball Z, yeah.
And Desert Punk. Yeah, lots of old titles from back in the day. But I think, yeah, maybe like 99 was my first session. So I was 4. For any of you listeners wondering how old I am, I was clearly 4 years old at the time. But when I first came in, it was all like young and excited. Teen Goten was up here, and he was the young noble hero striving, trying to do those things, and that's kind of where I was, and I couldn't break out of that, and I really wanted to do some more gruff and stronger characters and some more bad guys, and so Yu Yu Hakusho was the first time Justin Cook gave me the chance to try that. A down here guy. And I love the down here guys. Because anything before about 1 o'clock, this is what I sound like. It's down here, it's gravelly. It has to do with having not enough water and too much coffee, which is my natural state. And then so it used to be that the young guys were easy and the gruff guys were a stress on the voice. Now it's flipped. And Kogami is a great example, or Terror in Resonance that just came out is another example of just what I sound like when I roll out of bed. And that's always my preference. If it can just be a guy that's super calm and right down here, it doesn't take a lot of effort. Also, the more powerful or interesting a character is, the less they have to yell, I've found. So that's why I like doing bad guys now, because bad guys can be really powerful and very calm. They don't have to yell. And the hero has to yell and be mad and prove himself, but the bad guys just oh, okay, boom, and then they blow up. It's great. So I would say, the harder things now are to be that young, earnest, excited guy. Although I can still do it, and I keep trying to remind directors, hey, don't forget, I want to play a 22-year-old. I want to play the 18-year-old. It's not just Todd Habercorn. Come on.
So, here's another question. I just want to know, since you do anime with TV and with movies, but you've also been able to voice characters in anime-related video games, such as the One Piece game, Lux Payne, and some Dragon Ball Z titles. They just want to know, is there any difference in how recording sessions go when it comes to a video game related to anime as opposed to how the Funimation sessions goes with your movies and TV shows?
Well, I love video games. Borderlands 2 was a great game, and I got to voice Axton, who is your big turret playable character. And that was a lot more fun because in that world, you get to improvise and do some writing. And I'm a writer too. And Andrew, who wrote that game, is really funny, but also appreciates genuine moments when they happen. So you'll have scripted lines to fit a specific situation, and you'll take 3 or 4 passes at that line, and then they'll let you just go and throw out 3 or 4 more of your own that come to the top of your head as you've understood this character and kind of gotten into the character. And so in the video game world, there's more surprises because sometimes you'll be playing the game or listening to someone else playing the game, and you'll hear one of your lines that you came up with on the top of your head that made it to the game. You're like, oh, awesome. They used that. Another one I do Orcs Must Die, and that's a really silly, fun character, the mage, who's totally full of himself and kind of an idiot in a lovable way. And that's another opportunity to really improvise. You don't get a lot of chance to do that in animation land just because you're dealing with a pretty tightly scripted product, and it has to match the translation, and it's got to match the flaps. I mean, I think people don't understand how far we've come from the Speed Racer days of just to say things that don't have any relation to what happened. I mean, the translators and the writers at Funimation spend a lot of time making that fit and trying to find a believable way why 7 mouth movements would be needed to communicate this idea. And so you're really bound by that. We talk about voice acting being a weird mix of actual creative effort and really, really mechanical effort. It's kind of the combination of both because you're trying to do a character and you're trying to emote and you're trying to communicate something, but you have to do it in exactly 4.2 seconds, and you've got to have exactly seven mouth movements. And the third one needs to be long, and there needs to be a little hitch before the 5th one to match up those flaps. And so it's kind of a weird hybrid. And with video games and with first run animation, like not dubs, but actually just the creation, a lot of times those will be recorded beforehand and animated to match afterwards. So you get to drive the ship. If you're doing, like if you are lucky enough to ever get hired on like a Disney product or any, Pixar, any animation that's first order animation, they're going to record you first, listen to what you do, and draw to match that. That is not a luxury we have in the anime world. We are way further down the food chain in terms of our creative license. So yeah, video games are a lot more fun in that you get to do that. But it's also a shorter experience. You'll go in and you can knock out a video game in a day or 2. Whereas you can live with an anime character for months or sometimes years.
For decades, with Dragon Ball Z stuff and some of
One Piece have got, God bless, Doflamingo. Don Quixote Doflamingo just keeps popping up in the old One Piece. Every 2 years he's back. So it's kind of great to have a relationship that lasts that long.
So, I guess we have 2 questions left. This first one is it just me, or is Borderlands and Borderlands 2 basically a showcase for Texas voice acting versus the usual suspects that you get in, Edmonton with BioWare and some of the ones in Los Angeles?
Absolutely. I mean, and now a lot of the people that were in the game have now since moved to Los Angeles. And a lot of the people that had moved and left came back to do things for, Damien with the Captain Jack, not Captain Jack, what am I trying to say? Bad guy in Borderlands 2, what's his name?
Handsome Jack, Damien Clark.
Yeah.
We had him on the show with Butt Stallion Says Hello.
He is fantastic as Handsome Jack. I was thinking Captain Jack because I've been watching Torchwood. It's a different guy altogether. No, he was a Dallas guy and had those relationships and knew everybody. And so even though he's moved out to LA and is doing amazing things, was still part of it. Yeah, it was really nice to get a shot because, there are a few companies that are now producing out of Texas. And I think there's really strong talent here. I think there's great voices and there's people that have been working a long time. And so I was really glad that everybody kind of got a shot to shine. And I think it opened up some opportunity. I think some people were impressed, like, oh, that was all Dallas people? okay, maybe we should go look at that. So hopefully that will lead to some other things.
Yeah, because I know Orc Smokes Die, took place. A lot of the recording happened there too, and hopefully it's opening up stuff because there's a lot of you guys down there are just really fun, and we don't get to hear your voices as much. And why not spread out the love when it comes to it? Because not everyone can be in Edmonton or in Los Angeles or the different places. Unless you're Tom Kane is in Kansas City and just does what he wants. But not everyone can be in those places. And there's a lot of voice actors all around, and give them the opportunity. And there's game studios everywhere. I'm in Utah. There's video games made here all the time.
You're in Provo, right?
Yeah, I'm in Provo right now for about 2 more months, and then I'll be in Flagstaff.
Okay.
So, moving south shortly. But, there's lots of stuff happening all over, and it's just a shame that they tend to focus on one specific area for a lot of the voice recording when there's voice actors everywhere.
Well, the problem is, I think, a lot of times, especially if it's a new venture, there's a safety factor in okay, I haven't done this before as a game designer or someone like that, so I'm going to hire other people that have done this before. So I'm taking a risk on some other fronts. I'm not going to take a risk there, so I'm going to hire the usual suspects. And maybe they've got 20 different game credits to their name, and maybe some people kind of roll their eyes and go, oh, really, again? I've heard this before. But it's a safe pair of hands, especially for those smaller startup companies that are trying to to get in and prove hey, no, this is going to be fine. So, it sometimes takes a braver or a more experienced and established company that can take a risk and say, hey, we've never heard of this kid, but he's really good, so we're going to give him a title. And we're going to make him the lead in something and kind of hang our hat on their skills. So I always am impressed by people that take the risks to bring in new people.
That makes a lot of sense, and looks like we're out of time, so we're going to have one last question and then request for a bumper because we like our bumpers
Absolutely.
to promote everything. So last question is if people want to follow your work online, want to know what you're up to, is there any social media or any place where they can go to keep up on what you're doing?
I am a terrible tweeter. I'm so bad at the social media, so I will default to the admittedly lame Facebook fan page, but there's Robert McCollum anime fan page. What's it called officially? It's if you just search Robert McCollum, you will find it. But there's a Facebook fan page that we have updates and any conventions and things like that are going on is a way to track me down. I wish I was better at all of that. It's Robert McCollum voice actor fan page on Facebook is the way to do it. Like it, follow it. I post some fun videos now and then and try to keep it going. The other thing is I'm so bad at knowing what I'm allowed to say that I'm afraid to tweet anything at all. Oh, this hasn't been released yet. This hasn't been announced yet. And sometimes we'll have recorded something 6 months ago, and then the announcement comes out. At which point I've totally even forgotten that I was in it. Oh yeah, that's right. Because after years they just said, just don't say anything ever. Just don't say anything ever until someone else asks you about it or you see it online somewhere else. So I'm bad, but I'm going to try to get better. I'm going to start trying to tweet and Instagram. My housemate, Aaron Roberts, who also does a lot of anime and is blowing up right now, but it's working the Instagram and has all these shares. And I'm I just don't understand. I'm just a sad Luddite in this social media world. I need to hire a social media manager.
It reminds me of I think it was a story from when Mark Hamill did a voice for Star Wars: The Clone Wars, and he recorded it in 2 years before the show actually ended, and he was talking about at Celebration after the show ended, talking about how he recorded a Sith voice, and they're like, you can't talk about that. He's like, what? I did 2 years ago. It's not up yet? Why is it not up
yet?
Can
that still be a secret?
And they put it up on the Lost missions that happen on Netflix later.
Oh, gotcha.
That's a long time to wait in between recording something and actually putting it up. And I can imagine sometimes you even forget you recorded in something. And you're like, did I do? Oh, I did that show. That's me. I recognize my voice now.
Yeah, well, and that happens a lot, especially because if you're up there doing a session and they need someone for 2 lines. They'll say, hey, can you jump in here and do this? You don't even remember you did it. And then someone comes up with their DVD and is like, hey, would you sign this? I would be happy to, but I don't think I was actually in that. And they go, no, you were gangster number 4. Okay, great, awesome. I would love to be. I think I'm gangster number 2 in one of the Full Metal Alchemists because that was I didn't get to play in that pool very much because I wasn't around a lot during that time. I think that was baby number 1 time, so I was kind of out of the world. But I still signed them as a soldier number 2 or soldier A, whatever I was.
That's awesome. Hey, if they're willing to come up and give you your fame, take it.
If they're a fan and are willing to come to any convention, I applaud them. I love that there's that much dedication and the way that people want to be part of the community and connect with each other, so they actually get out of their houses and come to a place together with other people. Any excuse for that to happen, I think, is awesome.
Okay, so the last request we have is for a bumper, and these have been very different over time. Some people do them totally in character. Some people do them where they just list off a bunch of characters they do. But essentially, we just like to push people back to these interviews so they can go back and listen to them. So we essentially just like to have your name, maybe some roles or something people recognize you. Or honestly, I used to give instructions on what people want, and then it turned out to be most actors prefer to just say, "I know what I'm doing. Sure. I'll do this. I got this." So
well, only because we were talking about Borderlands, we'll do Borderlands, and then
okay,
we'll go from there. All right, you ready? You sure?
I am ready.
You feeling it? You feeling good about it?
Okay. I'm good.
Hey, this is Rob McCollum, voice of Axton in Borderlands 2. I love the smell of turrets in the morning and listening to Bombad Radio, but mostly the turret thing.
Awesome.
All right, there you go.
That works really well. We can put that with Damian Clark's where he says, "But Stallion says hello." Yeah, thank you so much. This is great. I love, one of my favorite things to do is talking to voice actors, because you guys always have so many stories, so many adventures, and you guys do so many different projects that really, if someone looks, I had a friend that looked at your filmography like, I have no idea what I'm a fan of. I'm like, there's at least 10 things on there that you've seen, and you're a fan of at least 10, but it's just so daunting at times. But you guys do so much different stuff, and it's great that people like you are willing to work with Funimation, and Funimation is willing to work with people like you and get these shows to us that we wouldn't get otherwise, at least not in English. And some of them, I don't think some of them people would never watch if they weren't in English or weren't sold by Funimation and others, because it's just so much stuff coming out of Japan that you just don't know what to go for.
Yeah, I mean that's part of it, is just that it's such a huge market that it's not even that like, oh, I love what Funimation does necessarily, but like, oh, there's no other conduit. It's almost like that's the editor, that's the playlist or the recommended list. Like, oh, I'll go look and see what they did, because at least they thought it was a good enough show that it was going to get a following and were willing to put some money behind it. So that's some way to gauge what to listen to and what to watch, because it's overwhelming. There's so much out there.
Amen to that one.